Hello everyone. Today I'm going to be talking about the humanistic approach. So before we go into what the humanistic approach is, let's go into what the classical approach is. This is an approach that was heavily utilized before the humanistic approach came into play. And the humanistic approach came into play in about the 1920s to 1930s as they began to question the classical approach. So let's go to this video, and this video gives a good representation of what a classical approach looks like. So as you can see in this video, the worker there, he had very specific duties that he was doing, and he is very specialized in what he was doing, and most likely that was the only thing he was trained to do. This is very representative of the classical approach. The classical approach was meant to increase productivity, and to do so, some characteristics of the classical approach were top-down communication, where leaders communicate to their subordinates, and the subordinates are taught not to think, just to do, and they are specialized in a certain task, and likely they will only learn how to do that task. So there's definitely some pitfalls of the classical approach. It did increase productivity, and that's why we saw a lot of great strides during its time period, but people began to question uh, different approaches. And so here we have the Hawthorne studies, and then also Douglas McGregor and some of his work. So the Hawthorne studies, they came up with these 2 points. The first point is that people need to be valued as individuals. With the classical approach, it left a lot of people feeling unvalued and unimportant. Another point that they saw is that relationships, group, and interpersonal help increase productivity levels. So not only does just knowing a specific task and being in the correct condition to complete that task, that's not the only thing that increases productivity. Having a chain line or like a chain line isn't the only way to be productive, but actually people become productive based on their relationships with their supervisors, their managers, and those that work around them. And Douglas McGregor said that leaders who encourage those under them are more effective than those who micromanage them. So delving a little deeper into the Hawthorne studies and Douglas McGregor, let's watch this clip on YouTube, and it will go a little bit more into their studies and what they found that supported the idea of the humanistic approach.
In the mid-1900s, management theories changed as researchers focused on the workers. These theories were referred to as humanistic or behavioral because they considered the employees' attitudes, behaviors, and social needs. The human relation movement was tested extensively in the Hawthorne plant of Western Electric, where worker productivity was tested over a variety of changing conditions, including lighting changes, pay incentives, and group pay incentives. Researchers found that workers developed their own unspoken system of performance. They set a productivity level and workers who produced less or more were looked at unfavorably. This was strong support for the power of group norms. Another theory that emerged was known as Theory X and Y. Theory X managers assume people don't like to work, so they need to be forced to work through threats and punishment. Theory Y managers assume that employees do like to work, and they reward employees by giving them more power and responsibility within the organization. Managers enable employees to work to their highest potential. The humanistic movement kicked off the management research trend to focus on the employees' attitudes, behaviors, and social needs, and set the stage for modern-day management practices and research.
So as you can see through these studies, they found out a lot of things about the humanistic approach and that contradicted the classical approach. So some differences between the classical approach and the humanistic approach is in the classical approach, as you can see, it's a top-down communication. With the humanistic approach, there is both top-down communication, bottom-up communication, as well as lateral communication. So you might wonder, where can we see the humanistic approach at work? I think a lot of times we only put these approaches into business settings, but there are other organizations in the world where these take place as well. One organization that I thought of was the Education Management Organization. So you have a classroom and you have a teacher in a classroom, and traditionally the approach might have been more of a classical one. The teacher is in charge. She gives instructions to the classroom. The classroom follows those instructions. They do. They don't think. They just do what the teacher tells them. So there's a humanistic approach to education. And let's give this YouTube video a look at, and it will go a little bit deeper into it.
Humanistic theory's basic concern is for human growth. It originated in the 1970s and 1980s in reaction to scientific reductionism, where people were being treated as objects. The humanistic theory believes that personal freedom, choice, motivations, and feelings are just as important. In the 1970s, Abraham Maslow's hierarchy of motivation was developed. Maslow stated that only when the lower needs are met is it possible to fully move on to the next level. Important to note is that motives at the lower level are always stronger than those at the higher level. Level 1 is psychological needs, saying that hunger, thirst, sex, sleep, relaxation, and bodily integrity must be satisfied before the next level comes into play. Level 2's safety needs call for a predictable and orderly world. If these are not satisfied, people will look to organize their worlds to provide for the greatest degree of safety and security. If satisfied, people will come under the force of Level 3. Level 3 says, love and belongingness needs cause people to seek warm and friendly relationships. Level 4's self-esteem needs involve the desire for strength, achievement, adequacy, mastery, and competence. They also involve confidence, independence, reputation, and prestige. Level 5 states that self-actualization is the full use and expression of talents, capacities, and potentialities. Learning contributes to psychological health, although it can be seen as a form of self-actualization. While self-actualization may be seen as the primary goal, other goals include a sense of accomplishment and the controlling of impulses. Carl Rogers studied humanistic theory related to learning in the 1980s. He affirmed that education should engage with the whole person and with their experiences. He also stated that learning combines the logical and intuitive, the intellect and feelings. The teacher's role, according to the humanistic theory, is to be a role model. The The teacher is to model appropriate behavior and make an effort not to replicate inappropriate behavior. A teacher is also expected to provide a reason and motivation for each task, teach general learning skills, foster group work, and if possible, give a choice of tasks to the students. The role of the student is to explore and observe. Students can use self-evaluation techniques to monitor and observe their own behaviors and make necessary changes. Students also need to take responsibility for their own learning and keep their goals realistic. Essentially, humanistic theory is based on the fact that learners need to be empowered and to have control over the learning process. In order to do so, the teacher relinquishes a great deal of authority and becomes a facilitator.
So that last line was pretty powerful, that the teacher has to relinquish a great deal of authority and become more of a facilitator. And we can definitely see that in the workplace as well, as we move from these classical roles of managers to more of mentors. In fact, that is what a lot of millennials look for in jobs, is to have less of a manager role and more of a mentor role. So that's one humanistic approach in the workforce. So I had some questions. So we could definitely see the humanistic approach in education, in traditional workplaces. I definitely see the humanistic approach taking place at BYU Idaho. My question for you, though, is, do you ever feel like the humanistic approach is not applicable or appropriate for some situations? And do you feel like the classical approach ever has more value or merit over the humanistic approach? I'd love to receive your feedback and any ideas you have on that. Other than that, thank you so much for listening. I hope you're able to learn a few more things about how the world is changing and how we moved from more of a rigid machine-like workplace into more of a person-oriented and communication style approach. Anyways, thank you so much for watching.